Hi everyone, welcome back after what feels like so long, but then again, it doesn't feel long at all actually. But today I'll be talking about AQA A-level Sociology, and this time we'll be discussing media. From when I'm speaking now, it is the day before A-level results day, so this is my way of just sort of distracting myself from that. I want to give my usual disclaimer that I'm not an educated professional. Like I say, I've just sat my A-levels this year, and I'm doing this video because, it might help other people for next year. And also at university, I'm hoping to do sociology with the hopes of becoming a sociology teacher. So this is just a nice little hobby on the side, but let's just get into it. So for those who don't know, media is one of the option topics on section B of paper 2. So not everyone has to study media. So if you're watching this now going, we don't do that. Well, you might do something else. Another common one's beliefs. But I did media, so I'm just going to talk about it. But you'll be marked on 3 questions, and there are a 10 marker, 10 marker, and a 20 marker. And this is worth half of your paper. So for me, for my other half of the paper, I did family, but also that is another option. So you might have done something else. And here is what AQA says that students have to learn, in order to do well in their exams and be credited for it. But you can pause this now if you'd like to read it. But I've broken it down into different sections, and this is how I'm going to talk through it in the video in this order. So first we have ownership and theories, new media, globalisation, selection and presentation of the news, media models, and then we're going into our representations in the media. So we'll be looking at gender, sexuality, disability, age, class and ethnicity. So to start off, what actually is the media? So the media refers to the predominant means of communication, such as television and newspapers, particularly of mass communication. Old media, however, refers to traditional forms of media, including print media, such as newspapers and magazines, and broadcast media, such as television and radio. And we should keep in mind that the media is a secondary agent of socialisation. So when we look at the ownership of the media, it's important to remember that the media is owned and controlled by only a small number of the ruling elite. And in current research, it was found that 7 people or companies dominate the ownership of all of our UK national daily and Sunday newspapers. I'm going to probably say this wrong, but Bagdakane's research shows that the ownership and control of the American media is concentrated to only 7, having fallen from over 50 in the 1980s. So an example of this would be News Corp, which is of course owned by Rupert Murdoch, and in the UK he owns newspapers such as The Sun and The Times. So one of our first key terms out of many for media is vertical integration. This is where media companies try to control all aspects or stages of the production of their media content. So for example, we could take a look at Disney. For their production of films, they own studios such as Pixar and Marvel, which helps create movies as well as television content. And then they distribute their own media through networks such as streaming platforms like Disney Plus. And then they also have their own theme parks and resorts where they can promote and display their content through various experiences. Then we have horizontal integration, and this is where a media corporation owns a diverse range of media. This can also be known as cross-media ownership. So for example, we're going to be looking at Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation again. So they own newspapers in multiple countries, for example, like we've already said, The Times in the UK, as well as publishing houses like HarperCollins and film studios like 21st Century Fox. This allows them to control various distribution channels and influence a broad audience through different media formats. Another key term is diversification, and this is where media companies invest in other business areas which are often non-media. This is also known as lateral expansion. So for example, we can look at Richard Branson's Virgin. Virgin is a clear example of diversification because it operates in a wide range of industries beyond media, including Virgin Media, Virgin Records, then Radio, Atlantic and Galactic. Another key term is synergy, and this is when media companies use a range of different products to promote and sell their concepts. Another variation is when a company producing a product owns newspapers and magazines through which it can be advertised and promoted. So an example of this would be Minecraft. So it was a single product that had developed into a global brand with all parts promoting and supporting each other to increase its profits. So how does Minecraft do this? So obviously it started off as a game, which has now become into like toys, merchandise like clothing, books, Lego, etc. Then the media comes into place, where there's like the Minecraft YouTube channels, animated series, or like the new movie that came out this year. And then Microsoft owns Minecraft since 2014 and has used its platforms to increase the profits further. And also there's Minecraft Education, which is on some like school laptops. I know my school didn't have it personally, but I know other schools did. I don't really know how it worked, but I know that it is a thing. Then we also have transnational corporations, which can be abbreviated to TNCs, and these are companies that operate all over the world. They manufacture, supply, and distribute products globally, and they can also be known as global conglomerates. Sorry about that, I couldn't say that. An example of this would be McDonald's. So McDonald's originated in the United States and now is available in over 118 countries and territories with over 43,000 restaurants worldwide. Okay, so now we're going to look at theories in the media, and we're going to start off with pluralism. And I just want to state, for media, it's a little bit different because, in other ones you have like your Marxists, your feminists, your functionalists, whereas there isn't a specific functionalist perspective in the media. Pluralism would be the closest to that. To just, to wrap your head around it, just keep that in mind as a sort of thing. They're not the same, but they're kind of similar in that whole like consensus-based theory. So, pluralists in the media is diverse, democratic, and reflective of audience demands. Media content is shaped by what audiences want, not by powerful elites or owners. Consumers hold sovereignty, which is power, and the power is spread across many groups in society. No one group dominates. Audiences are active consumers who can accept or reject media content. So, an example of this would be how social media platforms such as YouTube and TikTok allow anyone to create and share content. So, for example, right now I have been able to bypass traditional gatekeepers of media by producing these videos and uploading them on YouTube with no cost. And then streaming services like Netflix offer a wide range of genres and international content reflecting audience choices. Independent journalists, podcasts, and influencers give voice to alternate views, and political diversity is visible across different media outlets. For example, left-leaning and right-leaning news. So this is the idea that the audience has the choice, to choose which media they consume. They aren't passive and being fed the information, they are active and they can go, okay, well these are my ideologies, I want to align with this. Or well actually, I want to read about this, I want to watch this type of content, and things like that. But then how can we critique pluralism? Well, media companies can hire and fire editors that are sympathetic or not to their beliefs. So what that basically means is that if a company hires someone and they're writing news articles about something that goes against the company's beliefs, well they can just, fire them and get a new one that will align with their own ideologies. So that shows that it's actually not as democratic as they believe. And many top journalists are part of the establishment whereby they officially and unofficially network with top politicians, business owners, and the police. They are not impartial. And also, it's good to keep in mind that 50% of the top BBC journalists are privately educated, compared to 7% of the public. So obviously, these articles or types of media that are being published aren't going to reflect the general public, because these people, whether it's intentional or not, have not experienced the lives of everyday ordinary people. They are, privately educated. So how could they possibly, to a full extent, put themselves in other people's shoes? Now also, female voices are lacking in the media and are often objectified in terms of sexuality and motherhood. Our next theoretical perspective is instrumental Marxists. So, instrumental Marxists argue that the media is directly controlled by the ruling class. Media owners use their power to spread a dominant ideology that supports capitalism and protect their interests. Miliband argues that media acts as an ideological tool to manipulate the masses and maintain the status quo. This leads to a false consciousness. Working class audiences are distracted from their exploitation. They do this by running stories that divert attention away from structural causes of inequality. So, a main one in the media at the moment is the whole, immigration crisis and how they are turned into folk devils and there's a moral panic around it. But we'll get more into that later. Billionaire-owned media, such as Rupert Murdoch's News Corp, as you know, he's going to get mentioned a lot, often promotes right-wing political agendas that protect elite interests, such as lower taxes, anti-union messages, and 5 out of 7 main newspaper groups are owned by multi-millionaire press barons. News coverage may ignore or downplay issues like poverty, inequality, or corporate corruption. Positive portrayals of consumerism, success, and individuals reflect capitalist values. Working class or radical voices may be excluded or stereotyped, such as lazy or criminal. And again, this goes back to the whole idea of that the media is writing to protect their own interests, and that is the interests of the ruling and elite, as they own the media. So they're not going to publish stories that criticise themselves, because that's going to make themselves look bad. So their whole point of publishing the media is to protect their own interests, of course, from an instrumental Marxist perspective. Yet again, we can critique the instrumental Marxist perspective by saying that economic reductionism neglects other forms of inequality, such as patriarchy. So we're focusing on, the bourgeoisie versus the proletariat or whatever. It's taken away real other issues, such as the patriarchy, and it's diverting the attention, or if not, neglecting it completely. The working classes have a dual consciousness and support aspects of right-wing populism, such as anti-immigration views. Journalists expose political and economic corruption, such as institutional racism in the Met Police. For example, Mark Daly's Secret Policeman investigative journalism. If you haven't watched that, I'd highly recommend it. So basically, he was a journalist who worked for the BBC, and he went undercover and trained as a police officer to, unveil institutional racism. And this shows how not every journalist is out there to, fuel these big corporations. There actually, are people who go, well, hang on, I'm going to call you out on this because this isn't right. Next, we have hegemonic Marxists. So, unlike instrumental Marxists who say, no, the whole sole purpose of journalists is to protect their own interests of the ruling elite, hegemonic Marxists argue that it is an accidental byproduct because of the background of the journalists and broadcasters. And like we said, 50% of the top UK journalists are privately educated. So that is how this will come into play. Like, it isn't intentional of ignoring other narratives or other people's lives or pushing these certain agendas. It's just, a consequence of their own views. These journalists are most often centrists and consensus based. They often attack political views on both the left and extreme right. And this was found by Gumji. The mass media is run on a capitalist platform. It supports it but lives by it too. The consumer and therefore advertisers cannot be put off by extreme content. The media still decides the agenda. For instance, the BBC has been criticised for giving more airtime to mainstream political parties while marginalising voices from the far left or grassroots movements. This reflects agenda setting and gatekeeping where certain perspectives are prioritised and others excluded, reinforcing capitalist norms and discouraging radical change. Hegemonic Marxists argue that the Sun promotes dominant ideologies by focusing on celebrity gossip, nationalism, moral outrage, rather than systematic issues like poverty or class inequality. For example, it may vilify benefit claimants or Protestants while celebrating wealth and monarchy, thus aligning with ruling class interests and distract the reader from deeper structural problems. So again, as an AO3, how can we critique hegemonic Marxism? Well, like we've already discussed, economic reductionism neglects other forms of inequality, like the patriarchy. And also, feminists would argue that agenda setting is a patriarchal exercise to limit female roles in the media production and content. Also, the growth of citizen journalism allows the wider public to hold the powerful, including traditional media, to account. So things that wouldn't have been traditionally shown on, traditional media, now through social media and things like that, we all have a phone in our pockets. We're all capable of capturing and publishing stories that wouldn't have been published otherwise. So now we're actually going, hang on, well, that wasn't the true story. This was. And that's how we can hold them accountable. So our next perspective is postmodernism. And Troller says the media are not one aspect of postmodern society, they are its defining feature. Globalisation of content and ownership has increased the choice of media for consumption. There are many truths in a postmodern world. Owners can no longer influence their audience with their own biases as a consumer attaches many different meanings to the media they consume. This way, you can say media is polysemic, so it has many different meanings. So, Boreal looked at hyperreality and argued that in a postmodern society, we are surrounded by representations, signs, and media images that no longer reflect reality. In fact, they replace it. These simulations are so convincing and persuasive that people begin to interact with them as if they were more authentic than the real world. An example of this I like to talk about was how Mummy Pig's pregnancy was announced on Good Morning Britain. And it shows how the line between fiction and reality becomes so blurred that it feels real. Like, everyone was so invested in this. Like, it was announced on, morning TV, watched by thousands, if not millions, like, on the daily. And you're like, when you think about it, it's like, it's just a cartoon pig. Like, why are we all so immersed in it? But then, like, I remember there was, like, brand deals, and, like, when she was giving birth, like, there was a whole, like, lead up to it and, like, things like that. It's just, yeah, it's a very good example of hyperreality. But personally, I just hate the whole mummy pig birth thing. Like, I could talk about it for ages, but I won't. Another aspect of postmodernism is that they see participatory culture and two-way media as signs of society where the roles of the media producer and consumer blur. Audiences no longer just consume, they create, remix, and shape meaning. Platforms like YouTube showcase this shift as users engage with content both as viewers and creators, reflecting postmodernism's celebration of diversity, interactivity, and the breakdown of traditional authority. However, we can critique postmodernism by saying that there is an illusion of choice in the media and that content is just more of the same. This view can be vague and overlook issues of power and inequality, such as corporate control over digital platforms, and it may underestimate how dominant ideologies still influence media content. For example, many of the new generation of content creators have been incorporated into mainstream with product placement, video sponsors, etc. So it started off as this good platform where people can, just make content, but now actually are they becoming a new form of these multi-millionaires, They're building a brand for themselves, but just not in the traditional way. So our next topic we'll be discussing is the new media. So new media are those types of media that use digital technologies such as social media and the use of the internet. However, we have to keep in mind that what might be considered as new is always changing, and it is best understood as media that uses digital technology and the internet. So for example, social networking, blogs, vlogs, digital interactive television, text messaging, websites, online gaming, etc. Just all those kind of things. But how did new media actually emerge? Well, it came along with the emergence of new delivery systems, so the internet has helped share information with cheap new web-based hardware available to the masses, such as smartphones, tablets, and laptops, which obviously, nothing ever like this was available before, so this is how it all came about. So there are 7 main characteristics of new media, and these are them now. So we have digitalisation. Information, regardless of format, is converted into binary code and transmitted over the internet as a series of ones and O's. Technological convergence. Different types of media have converged with a single device. So Jenkins says that your iPhone is the electronic equivalent of the Swiss Army knife. So what that basically means is that your phone has literally everything that you could ever need. It has a torch, has a camera, has a map, has a compass, actually uses as a telephone, all those kind of things. And we have economic convergence. Separate media industries such as the music, film, and news enterprises have emerged. For example, Netflix is no longer a distributor but also a creator. So before, Netflix used to just have shows, but then Netflix also makes its own shows now. So for example, like, I don't know, like Squid Game, for example, like that is a Netflix owned show, like they created the show. Then we have interactivity and participation. New media is two-way and allows the content creator and audience to exchange information. The content can then respond in real life time to the audience input. The distinction between producer and consumer is no longer available. So the idea that the audience, communicates with the producer is so that content will be better because they can give real-time feedback, which helps improve content to fit the audience needs and wants. Then we have cultural convergence. Socialising has become more homogenous. 79, so this means more of the same. 79% of the total UK population uses social media. This impacts the volume of face-to-face interaction. So for example, people might be limiting their, real life interactions because it's so easy just to, hop onto FaceTime or quickly send a voice message, and it's like you're talking to them there and then. And within, busy lives, it might just be easy to do that, but then it also eliminates your actual face-to-face interactions. Then we have choice. So Boyle said that TV has evolved from supply-led to demand-led. Viewers are no longer restrained by TV schedules. The audience can choose what and when to watch a range of content on a singular device. So for example, before you'd be like, Coronation Street's on at like 7 o'clock tonight. I don't know what time it's on, but I'm just making this up. Whereas so it'd be like, right, okay, so we need to be sat ready for then. And that's what we're going to watch at this time, because we might have only had like 5 channels to choose from. Where now we've just got such a surplus amount. We've got Netflix, Amazon Prime, Apple TV, Disney Plus. There's just so much choice. And finally, we have collective intelligence. Participating in media culture allows individuals to pool resources and combine skills. This has allowed new media users to challenge pre-existing ideas, ownership and organisation of the media. Okay, so breaking it down into strengths and weaknesses. So first of all, neophiliacs, for those who don't know, it basically just means lovers of new media. If we break it down, that's kind of what it means, so just bear that in mind. So they strongly like new media. They're all for it. So neophiliacs are optimistic about the spread and influence of new media technologies. They believe the new media plays a positive role in society. However, on the other hand, cultural pessimists, spoiler alert, they don't like new media, believe the new media revolution has been exaggerated and plays a damaging role in society. They also argue that the media has always been interactive. So, strengths and weaknesses are the widening of choice in the media. There are now hundreds of digital cable and satellite TV channels, websites, digital newspapers and digital music. Like I was saying earlier, we have a surplus amount of choice now. This creates greater competition between companies, which leads to better quality. So, if you're creating a movie, you're going to want yours the best to make the most money in the box office. You're not going to half-heartedly publish something when someone else could take all the money from you, for example. Also, the e-commerce revolution has put consumers in control as they can compare prices, which increases competition and reduces prices. Yeah, again, that links back kind of to what I've just said. Negatives are that most channels play the same cheap imported material, repeats and reality TV. So for example, if you go onto TV now, I can guarantee that they'll be playing a Friends episode from 2002 or something, and it'll be on 5 times within the next week, that same episode. Things like that when you go on the channels and you're flicking through, and there's always that one thing you can guarantee it, on the movies channel, it's always going to be some sort of Harry Potter film, they're always on the TV. But then, also they say that this has led to poorer quality media with dumbing down of audiences, and the e-commerce revolution has led to consumer surveillance with cookies tracking your usage, leading to encouragement of consumerism and false needs. Another positive is there's more media participation. So interactive digital TV, blogging, citizen journalism, video and photo sharing are all giving consumers more opportunities to participate in using and producing media content. However, there's this thing called the digital divide. And this is the idea that not everyone has access to these new technologies, and this varies in terms of an individual's class, gender, age, or even the region that they live in, things like that. And the new media creates national and global inequalities as a consequence of this. So, arguably, a strength of new media is that it provides greater democracy. So, new media provides opportunities for people to acquire the education and information needed to play an active role in a democratic society. It also gives people a voice that would otherwise go unheard, and it allows people to coordinate and rally support for protests. An example of this would be like the BLM movement in 2020, where on Twitter people were like, right guys, at this time, this location, we're going to have a protest. Or, for example, the Arab Spring protests. Whereas, on the other hand, it can be argued that new media is actually threatening democracy. The new media enhances the powerful of the already powerful, as more and more of what we know is dominated and controlled by global conglomerates such as Google or Meta, which owns like Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, things like that for people who don't know. Keane argues that blogging and vlogging is dominated by narcissists and self-promoters. And also, young people are passive researchers online because of easy access to facts. However, fake news is rife on the new media. So, like, I'm sure you can remember at school, your teacher would be like, guys, don't use Wikipedia, it can have fake news, anyone can add to it, you don't know if it's factual. Basically, things like that. So, young people might go into Wikipedia, see something someone has edited, and take that as a truth rather than fact checking it in other areas. A further strength of new media is the global village. Through the new media, time and space has become blurred, allowing people from all around the world to connect and interact instantaneously. This new global village promotes cultural diversity and breaks down barriers, and different cultures are brought together. The digitalisation of media allows the content to flow easily across borders, and this can also help democracy. However, it can be criticised with the lack of regulation. The global nature of the new media spread by the internet means that there is a lack of regulation. This means that undesirable things like bias, internet crime, pedophilia, pornography, violence, and racism can thrive unchecked. Also, we have cultural imperialism. This is the idea that Western media is the leading cultural dominance. Through global advertising and e-commerce, we are spreading Western cultures to other cultures, leading to the undermining and destruction of local cultures. So basically, this idea that, America basically, because they control the media, a lot of other countries, they'll be English speaking because of this. They'll watch American films and things like that. But this can over time lead to the dying out of like native languages and things like that, because there's transition towards like Americanization within society and things like that. And leading on nicely from this, our next topic is globalisation. So globalisation refers to the increasing interconnectedness of societies across the globe for more accessible and advanced technology and travel. The media and new media has enabled us to be more interconnected. So, for example, we can interact with people from all over the world and access multiple cultures through music distribution. An example of this would be, I'm just going to use the band Kneecap for example. Also, I'm seeing them on Friday. 2 days. Exciting. But anyways, so they are an Irish band and they, make music that incorporates both the Irish language and the English language. And people can listen to that through the Swedish streaming platform known as Spotify. And users in the UK, like myself, will use Spotify to stream that music. And it's just like a whole full circle thing, like of how music can be distributed. But another example could be like things like K-pop, so that's South Korea and how it comes out here, or just any other different language of music, things like that. So, looking at globalisation and media ownership, global media conglomerates, or TNCs, can spread their ideologies around the world, supported by Marxist views of dominance in ownership and control of the mass media. Since the 1980s, the deregulation of financial markets and relaxation of the laws on media ownership has allowed overseas companies to take over many media outlets. Murdoch's TNC News Corporation has horizontally integrated across national boundaries, Rupert Murdoch has supported the Conservatives in the 1992 UK general election because it aligned with his business interests. Labour, led by Neil Kinnock, still had traditional left-wing policies. Murdoch feared his policies would hurt his media and broadcasting businesses through regulation. However, Murdoch soon switched up, and in 1997 he supported Labour largely to protect his media empire from tighter regulation. Tony Blair's new media reassured him there would be no major change to media ownership rules or stricter oversight, unlike the uncertain stance of a weakened Conservative Party. By backing the likely winner, Murdoch ensured continued influence over government policies affecting his business. So this is the idea that, like I say, people who own the media work in their interests of themselves. As you can see, he soon switched from a right-wing party to a left-wing party in order just to protect his own interests rather than his own actual ideologies. When looking at globalisation in TV programmes, we can look at how we can access a wider range of shows, for example, American sitcoms due to satellite TV. And also, when we travel abroad, we can still access TV which we are familiar with. Also, restricted content based on location can be overcome with a VPN. Neophiliacs would say that this is beneficial as the abundance of consumer choice helps to drive up competition to create higher quality programmes and films. However, cultural pessimists would argue that we are provided the illusion of choice. For example, TV channels often play repeats, such as Friends, like I've already discussed. Another argument surrounding globalisation is that the internet has increasingly replaced other methods of exchanging information, such as news, literature, and music, etc. As we access a large amount of content via the internet, cultural pessimists identify this as an electronic cocaine for its addictive effect on the brain. Because, people like to joke about how the younger generation are so dependent on their phones and they're constantly hooked to it. So it's almost like a form of drug. And this has led to the concept of doom scrolling. Individuals now have excessive daily screen times. For example, in the UK, teenagers aged 11 to 17 spend an average 8 hours and 39 minutes on screens daily, which, that is a hell of a lot of time. So, globalisation advertising. Bourgeoisie companies can now advertise their products around the world, so logos are now universally understood no matter where you are in the world. So for example, I'm going to show you 4 logos and I'm sure you'll know exactly what they are instantly. Of course, that's McDonald's, Apple, Nike and Coca-Cola. Children as young as 2 years old can recognise a significant number of brand logos, even if they don't know what the products represent. Studies show that by age 2, children can recognise an average 8 to 12 brand logos, and by age 3, some children may recognise around 100 brand logos. This ability to recognise logos develops quickly and is influenced by exposure to advertising and the brands they experience in their daily lives. The proletariat audience is turned into a unit of consumption, and this links to what we said in the family if you've watched that video. The consumer is lured into a construction identity built around the concept of buying branded goods, which is known as conspicuous consumption. So, that's saying, oh, okay, well, that person's cool and they've got, Nike trainers, so I need Nike trainers, so I look cool too. It's building and constructing this identity purely based off of brands. Next, we have globalisation and entertainment. The world's population now engages in the same TV programmes and events. For example, the Olympics, the Oscars, the Grammys, etc. We all have different versions of shows licensed across various countries. For example, Got Talent originated in the UK and now has spin-offs in over 60 countries. This is beneficial as it promotes the idea of participatory culture around the world and helps to dissolve stereotypes of low-income countries' culture and wealth. So, for example, there's a whole stereotype of the continent of Africa being completely deprived and, just desert land, where actually you have things like Nigeria's Got Talent. However, Marxists critique this for cultural imperialism as it leads to homogenisation, weakening the influence of local or indigenous cultures. So if I remember correctly, I said this word earlier, which is Americanisation, and that means the process whereby the USA is imposing its media products and therefore popular culture on less powerful nations throughout the world. So I've included a photo from my trip of when I went to Sri Lanka earlier this year. And as you can see, so this is like a very, like polluted lake. It had a lot of rubbish in it, and it didn't smell very nice at all. And as you can see, there was all these like, worn down buildings. But in the background, if you look very closely, you can see a big Coca-Cola billboard. And I just thought that would be a useful photo to take in terms of sociology, because it shows how, these $1 million companies and corporations have so much wealth, yet these like third world countries are suffering as a consequence of them, I don't know what I was going to say, but you know where I'm coming from. And this links to co-colonization, is the process whereby American consumer products penetrate the culture and consciousness of people in less developed countries. Hannah says to the detriment of their own local cultures. So as you can see, Coca-Cola is thriving, but the local culture is not. So critique of globalisation. The media TNCs deny choice and real participation in the media. Social media platforms are dominated by narcissistic self-promoters creating a me culture. Civic disengagement is the result of media saturation. Real communities and real social concerns are being replaced. However, Held argues against cultural imperialism in terms of reverse cultural flows. Global media can be selected and adapted to a person's needs. For example, Western musicians such as Damon Albarn, so he's from, Gorillaz and also Blur, for those who don't know, and Sting, he was part of, is it The Police? Every step you take. Anyways, have embraced African and Arab influences. African Express, which is a cross-cultural collaborations between musicians in Africa, Middle Eastern and Western countries, helps break down stigma and negative representations and stereotypes of Africa. Our next topic is selection and presentation of the news. So in 2005, 72% of people said television was their primary source of news coverage. Only 10% relied on newspapers for their source of news. Ofcom's survey in 2005 found that 94% of UK population believe that it is important for TV news to be impartial. And 67% of people regarded television news as the most trusted news source, whereas only 10% felt the same about newspapers. In 2014, it was found that 60% of 16 to 24-year-olds rely on the internet and apps for their news. Next, we're going to look at organisational restraints, and a little acronym we can use to remember this is SCATE. So let's look at what each of the letters represent. So S stands for source. Not all news organisations can have an active presence in the areas where the news stories happens, and so buy in news content and footage. C for cost. Financial pressures force news organisations to reduce spending on expensive forms of reporting, such as investigative journalism and foreign affairs coverage. A stands for audience, which is news content is tailored to audience preferences, often favouring sensational, entertaining or easy digestible stories to attract viewership and maintain advertising revenue. I stands for immediacy. The 24-hour news cycle and online platforms demand rapid production of stories, often prioritising speed over accurate depth. And T finally stands for time or space availability. News must be tailor-fit to either the time available for a news bulletin on TV or the column space in the newspaper. Then looking at newsworthiness. Newsworthy refers to what is regarded as interesting enough to appeal and attract a significant readership or audience. Goultang and Rouge argue that the way that the media is organised lends itself to journalism regarding events to be more newsworthy than others. These include, and you don't have to remember all of these, but remembering a couple would be useful. So Harrison adds that in a media saturation world, we need film and photos to support. Voigt argues that they wrongly assume that journalists agree on newsworthiness. TV and newspaper news are in different formats for different audiences. Voigt also argues that traditional journalism is under threat from spin doctors, journalism and citizen journalists. So looking into what those mean, we're going to have a look now. So spin doctors are political or corporate communication specialists who shape media narratives to present their clients in a favourable light. They craft press releases, influence journalists, and manage public perception, often manipulating facts to align with a particular agenda. This runs contrary to the idea that the press holds the government to account. Governments and powerful corporations can exploit the media for their own gain. Journalism refers to the practice where journalists rely on pre-packaged press releases from spin doctors, PR firms, or news agencies instead of conducting independent research. This leads to a decline in investigative journalism and an increase in biased or unverified news. News reporters do not have the time to check facts and instead just churn out unchecked stories, and this leads to things like, like false news and things like that. Citizen journalism, we've touched on this a little bit already, refers to news content provided by the general public, often through the internet. Citizen journalism allows ordinary people to report events, share opinions, and document issues using blogs, social media, and independent news platforms. This form of journalism has gained prominence due to the ability to provide real-time updates, especially in situations where mainstream media may be restricted or slow to respond. It has been particularly influential in political movements, disaster reporting, and exposing social injustices, such as the murder of George Floyd, which was caught on camera. So, presentation of the news. Chandler argues that TV news is the most trusted source of news. Buchanan carried out research based on interviews and discussions with 12 to 15-year-olds and found that the status and credibility of the news was perceived to be an honest and trustworthy reflection of the real world. News presenters are shown to be neutral observers, yet the news is scripted. For example, their body language is reduced by making them sit behind a desk, masking their true emotions. They speak in a friendly manner that is reliable and reassuring, and the visibility of tech used helps push the narrative that the news is authentic and trustworthy. However, instrumental Marxists would argue that the media is an ideological state apparatus. The news is a form of propaganda that aims to support the capitalist ideology. Whereas hegemonic Marxists would argue that the news presentation reflects the middle class and the ideological backgrounds of the journalists. There is an illusion of objectivity in the news. Okay, so next we're looking at moral panics. So we have some key terms here. So deviancy amplification. The media's reporting and representations of deviance is that such behaviour is strengthened and magnified. Moral panic. The term refers to the way in which the media reacts to a particular social group, their activities that are seen as threatening to societal norms and values. Folk devils, the deviant groups who are blamed for causing the threat to social norms and values as identified in moral panics. And then this leads to what Wilkins identified as a deviancy amplification spiral. So I'll let you pause and have a look, but it's basically the idea that an initial deviant behaviour is performed and then the media grabs hold of this, turns it into something much bigger, creates moral panic, which overall makes the behaviour even worse than it already was. And a criticism of moral panics is that audiences are not passive and can decide for themselves as to whether deviant acts become a moral panic. Postmodernists argue that the media gives a voice to those caught in the initial deviancy spiral. Then this links on to the hypodermic syringe model. So the hypodermic syringe model believes that there is a direct correlation between violence and antisocial behaviour shown on the media and real life behaviour. The audience are passive and powerless to resist. So this is the idea that it's a strong media but a weak audience. Children are very impressionable, and Gerbner suggests that representations of violence in certain types of media contribute to violent crime and antisocial behaviour in real life, especially that committed by the young. By the age of 18, American children will have seen on television approximately 16,000 real and fictional murders and over 200,000 acts of violence. Children, as a consequence of this, has become desensitised to violence. And a key what's the word? Like a study. I forgot what the word is. Anyways, a key study for looking at this would be Bandura's Bobo doll experiment. Case study, that's the word. Anyways, this demonstrates that children imitate aggressive aggressive behaviour they observe in adults. It highlights the influence of role models on behaviour and raises concerns about the impact of violent media on children. And then Bandura did a follow-up study in 1963 and found the following, which examined the effects of film-mediated aggression, including cartoon violence. In this study, children watched different types of aggressive models, which included real-life adults, filmed adults, and cartoon characters, to see how each influenced their behaviour. The results match those of the original study. Looking into the hypodermic syringe model further, we can see how it applies to, female and male behaviour. So Wolf argues that with the beauty myth, society socialises women into a quest for an unachievable standard of beauty, suggesting that only by being beautiful they can be happy and fulfilled. The media does this by bombarding women with images of the ideal type of beauty, and this becomes an Iron Maiden, a torture device that traps women and controls their behaviour. Dines argues that men's consumption of pornography may be harmful towards encouraging negative attitudes towards women. Men are trying to use rough sex going wrong as a justification of their violence. Men are being empowered to do so by media, both in films and books, such as 50 Shades of Grey. How can we critique the hypodermic syringe model? So censorship. In order to overcome, children being exposed to violence, videos and DVDs have been given age certificates. Also, all the TV channels agreed in a 9 p.m. watershed, and television channels often resort to issuing warnings before films, so warning this show may contain, scenes of violence or things like that, when they have like a little warning at the beginning of or like a little pop-up, like Netflix. I think it's in like the top left corner or something, it like pops up at the top normally. Then we have catharsis. Fezbak and Sanger found that screen violence can provide a safe outlet for people's aggressive tendencies. Ferguson argues that US youth violence fell 83% over the last 2 decades. Violent computer games keep young men off the streets. So before, to fulfill this aggression and need, they would actually, go have a fight with someone, for example. Whereas now, you can just turn on your Xbox and release the anger that way through alternate reality. What's it called? Like fictional, I don't know what the word is. And then sensitization. Young argues that seeing the effects of violence, and especially the pain and suffering it causes to the victims and their families, may make us more aware of its consequences, and so less likely to commit violent acts. Then we have lack of conclusive evidence. Cumberbatch argues that there is still no conclusive evidence that violence shown in the media influences or changes people's behaviour. There's no evident proof that, children are so passive to falling from this exposure. We all don't act in that way. Not every child who sees violence is going to be violent. And then active audiences, which links onto that. Gondler argues that people are not passive. Individuals do have choice and can think for themselves. Most children can distinguish between fictional and cartoon violence from a real violence from a very early age and are aware that it should not be imitated. So on the other side of the coin, we have the uses and gratifications model. The uses and gratification model believes that the media audiences use the media to satisfy their own needs. The audience picks and chooses their own media depending on what they want. There are 4 basic needs met by the media. So how the hypodermic syringe was strong media, weak audience, the uses and gratification model is a strong audience and weak media. So, number 1, diversion. To escape from our mundane routines, problems, worries and tensions, people may use the media to compensate for something lacking in their lives. Number 2, personal relationships. We are involved on a personal level with media characters and feel connected with them. We have become isolated from the real world. Media may provide compensation for the decline of community. Number 3, personal identity. People use the media to make over and modify their own image. People may use the experience of soap characters in the same situations as them to influence the way in which they act. Marginalised characters can help the audience to become empowered, shaping their own identities. And finally, number 4, surveillance. We can use the media to gain information about the world to help us formulate opinions. New media has allowed for greater variety of information sources, including TED Talks, Wikipedia, Twitter, which is now X, etc. Also, that surveillance isn't the same as of being watched. It's more so like gathering knowledge and things like that. But then you know how this goes by now. How can we critique the users and gratification model? So, the benefits are that disabled people can be empowered by their mobile, digital avatars on virtual platforms. So things like headsets or like VR, there's this digital world where it feels like a reality, but obviously it's not, and you can be who you want to be. So they're using these personas to help, their struggles of every day-to-day life. It sort of masks that. And then postmodern society has a rich media choice to meet the needs of a diverse range of different individuals. Whereas the negatives is that what is functional and gratifying for one individual may not be for another, and threaten value consensus. For example, the game industry helps certain men achieve masculinity, but is very misogynistic. For those who don't know what this is, it's basically where men go out on the streets and they try pick up as many women as possible, and they'll do things like trying to gather phone numbers and make a competition and things like that. So they thrive in that sense because they've met these men online, and then they go on these boot camps and things like that. But then for the women, it's not beneficial for them, is it? Because they're being exploited. And also, people of different age, class, gender, ethnicity and sexuality get gratification in different ways. The media landscape may not meet all of these needs. So we've now moved on to representations. We're getting through this video slowly but surely. Now, our first representation is gender. So, the male gaze. The male gaze in the media, particularly film, refers to how women are often depicted from a heterosexual masculine perspective, primarily as sexual objects for the pleasure of the male viewer. An example of this would be ITV's Love Island. The show often represents women as passive objects of desire, while men are active agents in control of the narrative. Women are frequently sexualized by camera techniques as well as editing and the choice of music. Love Island is heteronormative and lacks diversity, frequently associated to the male gaze. However, media is arguably polysemic. Some argue that women watching the show may find empowerment in the contestants' confidence and sexual agency, while others see it as reinforcing narrow beauty standards and gender roles. Also, around 2/3 of Love Island's audience is women, showing that women enjoy this male-tailored content. So now we're going to look at how the media actually represents women. So Tushman argues that the presentation of women in the media is biased because it mainly represents women as busy housewives, content mothers, eager consumers, or sex objects. And if you've watched my my family video, or if you've studied it in general and know about this topic, this links to when studying the family and we looked at cereal packet families. So it's depicting the mother in a very traditional role. Traditional media facilitated this by ignoring the fact that over half of British adult women go to work. The male body is also rarely objectified in mainstream media, with little reference made to a man's marital or domestic status. New media has further fueled this narrative via the increased romanticisation of the tradwife lifestyle. Social media depicts a conservative way of life as the ideal, pushing the nuclear family and the subordination of women. Arguably, however, the media portrays men in hypersexualized ways too, for the pleasure of women. For example, films such as Magic Mike, or superhero films where male leads are often shirtless or act in hyper masculine ways, and just the way they're built is just unrealistic, hyper muscular, and that is to add for the visual elements of it all. Also, streaming platforms like Netflix show featuring male nudity and sexualized male leads as central visual elements. And then Tushman further goes on to argue that women suffer symbolic annihilation, which is a process through which the media represents women in mostly negative ways. And it does this in 3 main different ways. So condemnation, which is how women are critiqued; omission, women are left out of the media; And trivialisation, women who are in the media are deemed as unimportant. So we can remember this by the little acronym of COT, C-O-T, condemnation, omission, trivialisation. Examples of condemnation: so tabloid coverage of female promiscuity is more likely to present women as sluts and men as players. Omission: Packer carried out content analysis of the 2012 Olympic coverage with only 4.5% of newspaper articles about women's sports, falling to 2.9% in 2013. And trivialisation: Kilborn argues that women are presented unrealistically, comparing them to mannequin figures who require the characteristics of long legs, tall, thin, perfect teeth, hair and skin. However, women are increasingly becoming less symbolically annihilated. Pluralist theorists argue that media reflects what audiences want. As society pushes for equality, media producers respond with more empowering portrayals of women. So, new media representations of women. New media has the power to challenge stereotypical representations of women. It is considered a feminine technology and offers women the ability to bypass gatekeepers into media content creation, like we've touched on earlier. So, however, does new media empower or reinforce sexism? So, Singleton says that new media is having a positive impact on the construction of female identities. Plant says that the internet has the power to destabilise the traditional patriarchal print and broadcast media, and women use social media and websites to challenge negative stereotypes such as the Me Too movement, or like empowering websites such as Mumsnet where women can come together and discuss topics. However, new media and technology has allowed misogyny to thrive, such as new ways of targeting women through like upskirting or like rough sex, like cartoon video, like rough pornography, things like that. Then ads on social media frequently target women with products related to beauty, weight loss, and domestically perpetrating outdated gender expectations. Women in public roles face disproportionate harassment, including rape threats and trolling, which can silence or deter them from participating in digital discourse. So before, like if they got into this field, it'd be like, great, they finally made it, a woman in a male-dominated atmosphere. Whereas now they're going to get critiqued in new ways online, so they'll be glad they've made it to this space. And actually, many women like de-promote themselves due to this trolling and harassment that they face. Next, we have media representations of masculinity. So there is lack of research into the reinforcement of culturally accepted form of masculinity in the media, with over 20 times more as much research into female representations. So that's a good thing to keep in mind. Children now ask boys aged 10 to 17 about their perceptions of male characteristics. It was found that they believed males are violent, generally leaders and problem solvers, they are funny, confident, successful, athletic, and that boys and men rarely cry or show vulnerability. McNamara research into media representations of men and boys shows how mass media often portrays male identity in negative and stereotypical ways. Men were depicted as violent and aggressive, wife or girlfriend beaters, or also irresponsible deadbeat dads. However, we can critique this, and I'll let you have a look here just to, save the length of this video. And within the media, the male gender and characteristics are represented in different ways with different categories, with one of them being the metrosexual male. And the metrosexual male refers to men who take care of their appearance in terms of consuming toiletries and fashion products, and who are unafraid to express emotional vulnerability. 20% of media representations now present this type of masculinity. An example of a celebrity under this category would be David Beckham, due to his following characteristics. So his designer hair, well-dressed appearance, tattoos that reference loved ones, and the fact that he's in very good health and fitness, and other characteristics such as how he celebrates his fatherhood, good-humoured, happy to participate in domestic labour, which is the expressive role, which is obviously, as we know, traditionally a female role, and it could be seen as demasculine if you do this, where actually, we're driving towards more equality of gender roles and eliminating them. However, Metrosexuality contrasts to hegemonic masculinity. Metrosexuality challenges hegemonic masculinity by embracing emotional expression and consumer-driven identity, whereas hegemonic masculinity reinforces traditional male dominance and emotional restraint. So what would our theoretical perspective say about this? Well, liberal feminists would say that 20% of content creators, directors and producers are men, 29% of lead characters on TV and film are men, and women are overrepresented in low-paid makeup and hair and underrepresented in more technical filming. And this is because of the blokish environment and the idea of canteen culture. So it's basically, the men will go out and socialise. For example, they'll go to the golf or they'll go to the pub or whatever, and they'll receive promotions through that way. Whereas women are more likely to have responsibilities at home. So, they have to be out go home for the children, things like that. So they can't be out in these socialising environments. Therefore, they're less likely to receive these promotions because they aren't there to take the opportunities, if that makes sense. Marxist feminists would say that representation of women links to capitalism and the literal attraction of audiences. Yet they say that media aimed at young women is more tolerant of their gender and sexual freedom. But then again, media aimed at older women is more traditional. Radical feminists say that the beauty myth is false consciousness, and the reason for this is that advertising industry promotes false needs. Women are systematically taught to hate their bodies through the media, again depicting these perfect bodies. This is how you need to look, this is who you want to be, even though that might not necessarily be true. Postmodernists argue that there is no longer a single male or female identity in the media, so that is good, it's new change. And the reason for this is things such as like girl power, which icons empower women, so like celebrities, for example, I don't know, like in the 90s you had like the Spice Girls. It's like this new wave of empowerment. And then men and emotional fragility is being shown more on reality TV. There's a whole thing around men's mental health. Men, it's okay to cry. Men do have emotions too. Whereas in the media before, this was like a suppressed emotion that men believed they weren't allowed to show. And then pluralists say that symbolic annihilation underestimates the ability of women to see through the stereotyping. And the reason for this is that the media reflects the consumer tastes and delivers content that men and women want. Our next representation is sexuality. So Batchelor said that magazines and TV programmes consumed by young people reinforce sexual stereotypes. These stereotypes include failure to represent different sexualities, as the media is heteronormative, and also that lesbianism is completely invisible in mainstream media that focuses on the youth market. Being gay/lesbian is used as a source of bullying or humour. Neophiliacs would argue that there is a more positive representation of homosexuality in advertisements today that are targeted at younger people. For example, the Google Pixel advert. So, representation, a huge part of it is actually just being seen. So by creating adverts with same-sex couples, it enables young people to see themselves in that, and it overcomes the stereotypes gradually over time. However, it can be argued that companies use rainbow capitalism. Companies using LGBTQ plus pride imagery and themes, especially during Pride Month, to appear inclusive and supportive of the LGBT plus community, often without genuine commitment to LGBTQ plus rights or well-being. This can also be due to the pink pound. This is since the gay community is more likely to have a larger disposable income than that of, for example, a nuclear family. Now, obviously, gay couples can have children, but obviously it's a longer process and things like that. But overall, they're less likely to have as many responsibilities, that's the word I was thinking there, compared to, a heterosexual couple. So, representations of the LGBTQ plus community. Hegemonic sexuality, that is the dominant sexuality in the media, is heterosexuality. Anything other than this is going against the norm of our society. The LGBTQ plus community is symbolically annihilated by their invisibility. A major fact about being gay is that it doesn't show. So, stereotypes of homosexuality. Dyer says that the media uses signs of gayness. The media achieves this by using facial expressions, stances, and clothing. These characteristics help to make the invisible sexuality of a character become visible. However, this can facilitate the creation of harmful stereotypes, leading to prejudice and discrimination from others in society. So, for example, stereotypes of like the gay hand, or you know, feminine gay body language, or like there was like this whole thing like 2020 was like, oh, guys like bisexuals like cuff their jeans, just like stupid things like that, which obviously aren't true. Craig identified 3 stereotypes of gay characters, including camp, which is flamboyant, non-threatening, and they present themselves between genders and they are ironic and sarcastic. Macho, they have an exaggerated masculinity, eroticized clothing, threatening, overtly sexualized. And third, deviant, with their predatory, guilt, immoral, and problematic. However, it is unfair to categorise someone limiting their perceived potential or opportunities based on limited information or preconceived notions. Also, not all gays fit into just one category. So if I had to try to think of someone who'd fit into like all the categories, I'd probably say like a famous example would be like Freddie Mercury or things like that. Like he would fit into all 3 categories, I'd say. So it's not fair saying, you're either one of these 3 types, because it's just nonsense. So next we have homosexuality and moral panics. In the 1980s, the UK media portrayed AIDS as a deadly and mysterious disease. It was heavily associated with homosexuality, leading to the label of the gay plague. Tabloid newspapers and TV news sensationalised the outbreak, often linking it exclusively to gay men. Media representations. The government's infamous iceberg public health campaign hinted at hidden dangers, reinforcing public anxiety. Interactionist theorists. Labelling theory explains how gay men were stigmatised. The label gay plague became a master status, overshadowing other identities and reinforcing stereotypes. Marxists would say that media owners shaped narratives that aligned with dominant ideologies. The panic served capitalist interests by selling newspapers and reinforcing heteronormative values. The media's portrayal of AIDS entrenched negative stereotypes and contributed to institutional discrimination, such as barriers to healthcare access and employment. It delayed the development of inclusive sex education and public health campaigns, which could have mitigated the spread of the virus. And looking at all this, we can evaluate, do stereotypes in the media still actually exist? So Stonewall found that out of 126 hours of programmes, only 46 minutes showed LGBTQ plus characters positively or realistically. And out of 100 major films released in 2014, only 17 films included LGBTQ plus characters. Pluralists would say that the reason there is a lack of positive representation of gay characters is because not all social groups have equal access to media power. They believe the media should be reflective of society's cultural norms. This is achieved by having limited influence from LGBTQ communities, which often leads to underrepresentation or negative portrayals. The media content is made to reflect those of the audience, supply and demand concept. So strengths are the new media has encouraged a participatory culture where the audience can get involved, normalise and improve representations. TV programmes are becoming kinder towards gay relationships featuring homosexual characters. However, plots still focus on homosexuality as a problem. That is, the individual struggling with bullying, anxiety, embarrassment, or etc. Also, when a gay kiss was shown in EastEnders before the 9pm watershed, the BBC received over 145 complaints. So this shows, that the general public isn't happy with, homosexuality being displayed on the screens because they don't want the children being exposed to it. So it shows that there's still these ideas deeply ingrained in society, withholding the stereotypes. Our next representation is disability. So Barnes identified media representations of the disabled. Those included pitiable and pathetic, for example, charity adverts showing disabled children with sad music and pleas for donations. This is often used to provoke sympathy and portray disabled people as helpless. Sinister and evil, an example of this would be villains in James Bond films who have physical impairments. This links disability with moral corruption or danger. Atmospheric, for example, disabled characters used to create a mood of mystery or unease. This treats disability as exotic or otherworldly. Sexually abnormal, the media that either ignores disabled people's sexuality or portrays it as deviant. This denies disabled people normal sexual identities or desires. Then we have super cripple, for example, characters who overcome disability with extraordinary strength or talent. While seemingly positive, it ignores social barriers and implies unrealistic expectations. And finally, incapable of communal participation. For example, news coverage that excludes disabled people from stories about work, education, or leisure, which suggests that they are outsiders or unable to contribute meaningfully. How do telephones reinforce the media model of disability? So an example of this would be like children in need or something like that. That's what a telephone is, for those who don't know. So disabled people require the help of the able-bodied, which leads to telephones like children in need to raise money for disabled people, which overall, you go, okay, you can't critique that, like that is good, it's helping disabled people. But then telephones entertain the public mostly with little insight into discriminations faced by the disabled. Then telephones present the narrative that the audience are givers and the disabled are receivers. This leads to the confirmation of social prejudice, and it just keeps going round and round and round, and it fuels the narratives without actually making them any better. So, how is disability represented in the news? Williams Finlay examined two broadsheet newspapers, The Guardian and The Times, to see if their coverage of the disabled had changed between 1989 and 2009. He found that there was a steep decline in the use of stereotypical language such as sufferer, courageous, condition, deterioration, and brave, meaning that audiences are encouraged to feel less sympathetic towards disabled people. However, it was also found that stereotypical representations were still present. Gumji did a content analysis of the media between 2004 and 2005, and they found within 713 disability-related articles, they found that benefit fraud relating to disability represented 2.8% of all stories. The terms scrounger, cheat and skiver were used in 12% of tabloids. Then again in 2010 to 2011 they repeated this, and out of 1,015 disability-related articles, there was a reduction in sub-story articles, and the total number of stories increased to 6.1%, and the terms used in the previous, in the 2004-2005 study had increased to 18%. So, is the portrayal of disability changing in the media? Gumji studied soaps, dramas and sitcoms on the main channels between January and March in 2014. They found encouraging signs that mental health depictions have become more positive. More storylines have attempted to normalise mental health problems, with fewer characters with mental health problems portrayed as violent. For example, Steve McDonald's depression story in Coronation Street. In 2014, the show explored his symptoms and reluctance to seek help, which resonated with many viewers. The storyline was praised for encouraging men to talk about their mental health, whilst challenging the stereotype that mental illness is linked to violence or instability. In 2015, the BBC recruited for a disabled weather presenter, and Lucy Martin got the job, showing that things are improving in relation to the representation of disability on our TV. However, social media and the BBC were flooded with complaints about CBBC presenter Kerry Burnell and how their children were frightened when seeing her disability. So she's an amputee. And I remember her from my childhood. I'm sure many of you do too. So, one doctor speaking at the British Medical Association conference said it disturbed her that society might seek to view disabled people as a source of comedy. Another doctor said that it is, in fact, raising awareness of these conditions, normalising what people sadly see as abnormal. For example, the TV show The Undateables can be linked to this argument. So who is right or wrong? From this, we can establish that the media is polysemic. It is up to the individual to attach their own meanings to the media they choose to or not to consume. One side of the debate argues that the disabled are symbolically annihilated via trivialisation, whilst the other challenges omission. So, what would different theorists say about this? Well, pluralists say that representations of the disabled reflect the medical view, that disability is dysfunctional for both the individual and society. Representations reflect society's admiration of the courage shown by some disabled individuals, especially the young. Disabled people are portrayed realistically, showing the everyday conditions of the individuals and their carers. The social construction view argues that disability is shaped by more negative social reactions than by impairment itself, with media playing a major role in setting the public agenda. It often portrays disabled people as tragic, dependent, and incapable of normal life, reinforcing prejudice and fear among non-disabled individuals. Tabloid journalists rarely consult disabled voices and tend to favour the medical model, which sees disability as something to be fixed. This representation justifies the role of professionals whose job revolves around managing the perceived problems caused by disability. And then postmodernists say that there is no fixed reality. That is the decline of the medical model meta-narrative. The disabled have found a voice on traditional and new media. Positive representations are shown in places such as on the BBC, and negative representations are shown in the tabloid press. Our next topic is representations of age in the media, and we're going to start off with theoretical perspectives. So, functionalists see the media as a secondary agent of socialisation and help to instill boundary maintenance for children. Media stories about children and young people reinforce social expectations as to how those groups should behave and, importantly, what happens to them when they don't. That is, negative news reporting acts as a form of disintegrative shaming. Marxists believe that the media is part of the superstructure of society and that it ideologically supports capitalism. Gumji argued that middle-class journalists shape the news agenda, while products are strategically marketed to different age groups through tactics like pester power and the grey pound. Feminists believe that the media helps to reinforce patriarchy. Gender seems to interact with age in a positive way for men. Women over 40 are often reduced to character parts, and children, especially girls, are being overly sexualised. Pluralists believe that media representations of age are unproblematic and offer a window on the world rather than unrealistic portrayals. The young, old, and middle-aged are all consumers of media. If media content failed to reflect them and wider changes in society, they would simply just switch the media off. Interactionists argue that media representations of the young are quite negative and are a threat to social stability. This is because the younger generation often challenge the moral authority of the older generation. The traditional media uses moral panics to help enforce social control. So, childhood. Content analysis into representations of children in the UK media identified 6 categories. Cute. So this is a common stereotype in television commercials for products such as toilet rolls. So you can see here the use of children looking cute to sell products. Little devils. This stereotype is especially found in drama and comedy such as Bart Simpson's, children are reckless little nightmares basically causing havoc all the time. Brilliant. Children receive high status labels such as child prodigies or heroes for saving the life of an adult. So I can guarantee you've probably seen in your life at some point, them viral 911 or 999 calls of a 5-year-old child ringing the ambulance for the parent or something. Everyone's like, oh, the child's a hero, things like that. But if anyone else called an ambulance, it'd just go it'd be like, yeah, whatever. Do you know what I mean? But the children's like, oh no, they're a hero. Then we have modern children today know more at their age than the previous generation of children did. Accessories. Children are used by celebrities to humanise them, such as the Beckham families. It's like, oh, we are like you guys, we're parents too, we understand your struggles, when really they're sat on millions of pounds. And then finally, brave angels. Children are shown suffering from long-term / terminal illnesses and disabilities and shown as brave. So for example, again, children in need publishing the stories of children with these disabilities or long-term illnesses. However, how can we critique this? Well, research into how children are represented in the media remains limited, with most studies originating from the United States, and obviously children aren't a homogenous group. A child's experiences of childhood can vary in terms of its class, gender, ethnicity, or religion. For instance, children from African or Asian backgrounds are often underrepresented, and when they do appear, they are frequently depicted in narrow stereotypical roles, such as child prodigies, child soldiers, or victims of war and global poverty. Moving on, we're looking at youth in the media. So a broad range of media is aimed at young people, shaping how youth is socially constructed through lifestyles and media habits. Examples include youth-focused music, video games, social media platforms like Instagram, Snapchat, and TikTok. How are youth presented in the media? Young people are frequently portrayed as a social issue depicted as immoral and rebellious. Consequently, they are often branded as folk devils. Historical examples are teddy boys of the 1950s and more recently, the hoodie stereotype of the 2010s. The media tends to exaggerate their deviant behaviour, intensifying public concern and triggering moral panic. Symbolic annihilation of the youth. So, omission. Only 13% of stories across the main TV channels during May 2006 were about young people, with only 1% of stories including opinions of young people. Young people are trivialised, as 28% of youth stories were about the children of celebrities, and also there was a lack of reporting regarding real problems suffered by the youth, such as mental health, and the youth are condemned by the media, since 82% of the stories focus on youths being the victims or more likely perpetrators of crime. Then we have old age in the media. So age and social class can combine to create a positive representation. Older individuals from middle or upper class backgrounds, often men, are frequently portrayed in British media as holding positions of power and respect, such as judges, politicians, or business leaders. They are usually shown as healthy, active, and socially engaged. For example, Lord Grantham from Downton Abbey, who is depicted as honourable and influential, embodying wealth, authority, and social grace in later life. Gender can also interact with age in a positive way for men. For example, male actors continue to play lead roles regardless of their age. Most famously, we can, for example, think of Daniel Craig, who plays James Bond. However, older women are more likely to be replaced with a younger woman than an older man. An example of this would be Eileen Phillips being replaced on Strictly Come Dancing by the younger Alicia Dixon. This sparked ageism controversy. However, age concern found 3 common ways in which old people are represented in the media, which also can be in a negative way. So they are seen as grumpy, stubborn, and resistant to change. Men are presented as bad-tempered and speak enthusiastically about the good old days, whereas women are presented as busybodies. So, like gossipers, basically. They're also depicted as mentally challenged, so growing old is about the loss of mental function. Old people are forgetful, feeble, and severely confused. And third, burdensome. Old people are an economic burden on society through pensions, care, and housing. They are also a physical and social burden on their family. Feminists would argue that this burden disproportionately falls onto women, known as the pivot generation, which you'll also know about if you watch the family video. These stereotypes can be found in popular comedy TV sitcoms such as Mrs. Brown Boys and Father Ted. Okay, we have 2 more topics to go. So, social class. Social classes can be divided into 4 key groupings, each being represented differently in the media. These include the upper class, that is the bourgeoisie, the titled, aristocracy, monarchy, and some A-list celebrities. The middle class, which is service sector, white-collar workers and professionals. The working class, which is the proletariat and blue-collar workers. And the underclass, which is the precariat. So, starting off with the upper class and making our way down the class ladder, we have neo-Marxists' view that argue that the mass media representations of social class tend to celebrate hierarchy and wealth. This explains why the wealthy are rarely presented in a negative way or in a way that challenges their wealth. We are taught to accept ascribed status, proving the myth of meritocracy, as well as not to question the origin of wealth, primogeniture, violence, etc. According to Nairn, the British monarchy rebranded itself to maintain relevance and legitimacy in a modern society while preserving its traditional image. He argued that the monarchy adapted by embracing media visibility and invented rituals such as televised coronations and royal ceremonies. This rebranding helped mask the monarchy's role in sustaining an outdated hierarchical state. This links to false consciousness as it creates a romanticised image that distracts people from questioning the unequal power structures it represents. Approximately 25% of the UK population wants to abolish the monarchy, yet this isn't reflected in the media, and this can link to the Royal Rota. And basically, to sum it up, the Royal Rota is a system where a select group of UK media outlets are given exclusive access to cover royal events. They get an insight of it, and they can publish oh guys, the royals. And these journalists attend engagements and share their reports with other photos, share photos with other journalists and things like that to increase their own profits and things like that. So that's why the royal family are depicted in such a positive light, because they have these contracts that don't reflect the UK population's opinions. Print media includes a designated financial section to reflect the interests of wealthier readers, even though most people don't own stocks or engage in high-level finance. According to Newman, the new media focuses heavily on the lifestyles of the wealthy and privileged, showcasing luxury goods, holidays, fashion that are inaccessible to most, while ignoring wealth inequality. Pluralists support this representation, arguing that media reflects audience demand in a meritocratic society, portraying the wealth as deserving of success and motivating others to aspire to similar rewards. Next, we have the middle class. So, how are middle classes represented on TV? The middle classes are overrepresented on TV, being the predominant media creators and consumers. In news and current affairs, the middle classes dominate powers of authority such as financial advisors. Also, middle class concerns and support dominate those of the working class or underclass. For example, morning TV may provide advice on mortgages, but not on poverty and food banks. For example of this is Martin Lewis, who's known as a money saving expert, and he's often on ITV News and things like that on the morning. How are the middle classes represented in newspapers? Media products are often aimed at the middle classes and targeting their consumption habits, interests, and lifestyles. Pluralists argue that this reflects audience demand as advertisements promote material goods like cars, computers, homes, and garden designs that appeal to this demographic. Newspapers feed the anxious middle class with stories that reinforce their position in society. Moral panics, such as those about benefit scroungers, feed the narrative that the hard-earned wealth and status of the middle classes is under threat from folk devils rather than ruling elite. Next, we have the working class. What do Marxists say about the representations of the working classes in the media? The working classes are symbolically annihilated through omission in sitcoms and films. The media assumes that working class people are not interested in serious political analysis. They are symbolically annihilated by trivialization through celebrities, gossip, sports, etc. They depict working class people as feckless, promiscuous, and foul-mouthed racists. Marxists argue that newspapers serve the working class bread and circus by offering superficial comforts and distractions while ignoring deeper social and economic inequalities. This keeps the working classes passive and disengaged, reinforcing capitalist ideology and preventing critical thought or resistance to the status quo. For those who don't know, bread and circus is basically, bread is the idea that it's the actual information, where circus is the entertainment that is provided in magazines or news articles to distract people basically, but and dumb down the audiences. So what do pluralists say about representations of working classes in the media? Pluralists argue that the media reflects the interests and demands of the working class. Films like The Full Monty and Maiden Dagenham are seen as positive examples portraying working class characters as resilient, humorous, and capable of collective action. These stories highlight real struggles such as unemployment and gender inequality, while still offering relatable and uplifting narratives. Pluralists support such representations claiming they give voice to the ordinary people and show that media can serve all social groups in a democratic society. And then at the very bottom we have the underclass. So poverty porn refers to any type of media which exploits the poor's condition in order to generate the necessary sympathy for selling media content. It has the additional benefit of reinforcing neoliberal, which is the new right, narratives that the poor are most often responsible for their own downfall. It also serves as a form of entertainment for the masses. An example of this would be the Jeremy Kyle show. So obviously it gets people who are, very heavily in poverty and to basically use as a source of entertainment. People laugh at their misfortunes, and that's kind of the reason why Jeremy Kyle actually took off our screens, because people who had been on the show had unfortunately taken their own lives as a consequence of the humiliation they'd faced from being on the show. Then we have the stereotype of the chavs. So the term chav actually originated from Eastern Europe, but has been adapted into a term by the new media, which stands for council housed and violent. The media also labels chavs as scroungers, hooligans and thugs. The underclass are symbolically annihilated by condemnation. They are done so by being labelled as benefit fraudsters, work-shy, dysfunctional families and parents, antisocial behaviour, drug abusers, etc. The contrasting coverage of Madeleine McCann and Shannon Matthews highlights how the underclass is underrepresented in the media, leading to symbolic annihilation. Neo-Marxists argue that this reflects a gender setting where media professionals control narratives by choosing what to include or exclude, such as ignoring the working class community's efforts to fundraise, distribute leaflets and support the search. And finally, last but not least, we have our final topic, which is representation of ethnicity in the media. And we're going to start off with Stuart Hall's representation theory. So this theory challenges the idea that the media simply reflects reality. Instead, media actively constructs meaning. It does this through 3 stages. Number 1, meaning is constructed. Media doesn't simply reflect reality as it is, but actively shapes how audiences understand events, individuals and social groups. 2, power to the makers. Individuals and groups who control media production, often from privileged backgrounds, hold the power to shape dominant narratives and reinforce stereotypes related to race, gender and social groups. And number 3, normalising representations. When media repeatedly presents certain portrayals, they can become accepted as common sense or natural. This process supports hegemonic power, allowing dominant groups to shape and maintain societal norms and values. Hall encourages audiences to question media representations, analyse who created them and consider their agenda in shaping public perception. Although dominant groups try to fix meanings, audiences respond in 3 ways. Preferred reading, audiences accept the intended meaning. Negotiated reading, audiences partly agrees, partly resists. And oppositional reading, the audience rejects the intended meaning. And here's just some good background information to know, so you can add it to AO2s and things like that. So the BAME groups represent 18% of the UK population, which is found by the 2021 consensus. The UK is regarded as a multicultural society, that is, a society within which great differences of language, religion and lifestyle coexist. Postmodernists argue that the media representations of ethnic groups, both minority and majority, ought to reflect the diversity of a multicultural society. Functionalists would contend that the media should help immigrants to assimilate to mainstream British culture. Some groups are represented more negatively than others, and the representations vary across the media. In addition, representations vary across ethnic groups and can also be seen to respond to wider social factors. So first we're going to look at a pluralist perspective. So pluralists argue that the media is audience-led, with consumer sovereignty shaping content. As the BAME community expands, media portrayals may become more positive to appeal to this growing market. If outlets fail to reflect audience interests, consumers will turn to alternatives to that do. The wide spectrum of media ensures diverse perspectives are catered for, including real public concerns around terrorism, immigration and crime. Crucially, the media also serves as the fourth estate, holding the powerful to account. Evidence in cases like The Secret Policeman, which exposes institutional racism within the police, like we spoke about earlier, we spoke about The Secret Policeman. AO3. Despite pluralist claims, neo-Marxists would agree that journalists often act as opinion leaders, shaping the media agenda to influence public perception, rather than simply reflecting audience views. This can be especially problematic when large segments of the white population have limited direct contact with the BAME community, relying solely on media portrayals to form their opinions, potentially reinforcing stereotypes and biased narratives. Then, a Marxist perspective. Instrumental Marxists view the media as an ideological state apparatus that indoctrinates audiences into accepting capitalist values rather than serving the public. The media functions to distract the working class using entertainment to pacify and moral panics to divide, ultimately covering the exploitation and inequalities inherent in capitalism. This manipulation helps maintain the status quo by preventing collective resistance and reinforcing the dominant class interests. Hegemonic Marxists argue that the media bias isn't always intentional, but often stems from the unconscious values of journalists, many of whom come from white middle-class backgrounds. Since white audiences make up the majority, their perspectives tend to dominate the media landscape. Ethnic minority professionals may feel pressured to conform to these dominant narratives to succeed, meaning that black or Muslim interests are often underrepresented or shown in tokenistic ways. We'll talk about that more later. And when stories about these groups are covered, they are usually told by external experts rather than members of the communities themselves, limiting authentic representation. However, the media is increasingly diverse. Left-leaning outlets like The Guardian have covered BAME issues in depth, for example, the Stephen Lawrence case and racism in the Met Police. The new media and social platforms let minority voices bypass traditional gatekeepers. Citizen journalism, like that seen in the BLM movement, challenges mainstream narratives and gives more authentic representation. Next, we have the neo-Marxist perspective. So Stuart Hall argued that in the 1980s, the media portrayed young black men as folk devils, creating a moral panic that blamed them for social problems. He believed that this was driven by moral entrepreneurs working in the interests of the bourgeoisie, using these narratives to distract from the real cause of economic decline. Following deindustrialisation under Thatcherism and new right policies, unemployment rose, and the elite used criminality like riots and football hooliganism as a scapegoat to shift attention away from structural issues. An example of a scapegoat in contemporary UK society would be immigration. The UK media, right-wing, fueled narratives that depicts them as a threat and/or burdens on the state. This coverage helps to reinforce stereotypes while also distracting the British population from their own exploitation. So, as we know, media isn't just things like films and TV and the news, it's also music, and because of that, we're going to look at gangster rap. And gangster rap is a style of hip-hop that emerged in the mid-1980s, using music to reflect the harsh realities of urban life, crime, and systematic oppression. It gained mainstream attention through groups like NWA, whose raw depictions of violence and police brutality sparked both controversy and cultural impact. So gangster rap is positive because it articulates the experiences and conditions of young blacks living in inner-city deprived areas who feel stereotyped. It also leads to major employment in creative industries for BAME community, where they can create their own record labels as a result of rejection from white gatekeepers. It also provides a safe outlet to communicate anger caused by injustice and racism. However, it can be seen as negative as it undermines potential awareness by expressing misogyny, violence, drug use, and homophobia. It also promotes hypermasculinity through wealth and sexual conquests, and through that it also heavily sexualizes women through trivialization. So, gangster rap empowers young black men by voicing struggles within racism and poverty, but it is sexist, violent, and homophobic language can undermine that message. Feminists argue that while gangster rap reflects wider patriarchal and capitalist values, it reinforces harmful stereotypes, diluting its potential as a tool for resistance and social change. Now, I touched on this a little earlier, but we're going to talk about tokenism. And tokenism is making a symbolic effort to do a particular thing. In TV, it means recruiting a small number of actors from minority ethnic groups in order to give the appearance of racial equality. An example of tokenism in British TV is the frequent inclusion of a single black or minority ethnic character, often referred to as that one black friend, within an otherwise all-white cast. A Channel 4 and YouGov study found that many UK adverts and programmes featured BAME individuals in shallow stereotyped roles simply to signal diversity rather than other meaningful representations. However, British TV is changing to become more diverse. An example of this would be Netflix's Sex Education. The show offers rich, authentic representations of diverse characters, especially from the Black and LGBTQ+ communities. By centering these narratives, Sex Education reflects the true diversity of modern Britain and sets a new standard for inclusive storytelling. And finally, for our last slide, we're looking at, is the media becoming more diverse? The media is increasingly showcasing diversity by including more BAME individuals in TV, film and advertising. This shift reflects broader societal changes and growing awareness of multicultural Britain. Shows like Top Boy and I May Destroy You and Sex Education feature BAME leads and explore issues like racism, identity and cultural heritage. Media institutions are responding to pressures from audiences and advocacy groups to improve representations and challenge stereotypes. Pluralists argue that media reflects a range of views in a democratic society. The rise of streaming platforms like Netflix has allowed more diverse voices to bypass traditional gatekeepers. For example, Top Boy offers a raw portrayal of urban Black British life. This shows how media can empower marginalised communities and reshape public perceptions. Marxists argue that media diversity is often commodified to attract wider audiences without challenging dominant ideologies. As an ideological state apparatus, the media reinforces ruling class interests. BAME stories that reach only niche audiences may not disrupt hegemonic norms, but they may influence mainstream, especially white viewers, that can challenge institutional racism. Structural change within media institutions is needed for meaningful progress. And that finally brings us to the end of this video. Thank you so much if you've made it this far. And I know this video, obviously in length it's not, but me talking through it is quite quick. But at the end of the day, it is just a quick, summary of the course. When it was exam season, I had lots of people depending on these videos, and if I could give any advice, please do not depend on these videos as your sole, type of revision. These are good, as a quick refresher to watch before your mocks, or like say next year before the real things. Or you could watch a segment of the video as I include the timestamps, and you could watch it and then you could do like a 30 marker or a 20 marker or a 10 marker depending on what video it is on that topic, and use it that way and utilise it for your own gain. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed. Please comment feedback and most importantly some more video ideas. And yeah, I hope to see you all again soon.